Well, hello. Well, hello. Well, super hello.
Wow.
All right, guys, I have a shtick. Brett forms legs and trunk. Mike forms arms and body. And I'll form the head. What's up, you guys? The Pencil to Pencil podcast, Voltron, is complete. Welcome back to the podcast. I am Jamar Nicholas, the Kevin Bacon of comics, and also the Black Dick Cavett. Hello. Welcome back to the podcast. I am joined by modern masters of comic books, my good buddy, Brett Blevins. Say hi, Brett.
Hello.
And my other best bud, Mike Manley. Say hi, Mike.
Cornwell's sleeping.
Well, hello. Guys, you have no idea that the well, hello greeting has gone viral. We have a hashtag. People across the globe say, well, hello, when they see me in the streets.
Wow.
And you go, who are you? Who are you? How dare you say hello to me?
But we also make sure they're masked up. Yeah, I'm feeling good tonight. Welcome, everybody, back to Pencil to Pencil, your pandemic podcast. We are brought to you, as always, by our good buddies at Graphicsly, who make, look at the John up there, Clip Studio Paint. And also our best buddy, John Morrow, who is the publisher of Tomorrow's Publishing, the lovely publisher of Draw Magazine, where you can find the comic, the comic boot camp that Brett and Mike do. Also, I'm the crusty critic, doing supply reviews, and also
that's better than the crusty boot camp.
Yeah, it's not the same. Let me get these things off my face. It's good to see everybody. Brett, everybody misses you. Give us some good news we can use.
I was married recently.
Congratulations.
Yes, and that has altered my schedule for the better, but it's hard for me to get the evenings clear. So,
JRD says, Mr. Blevins, welcome back and congrats.
Thank you, Mr. Deans. I see your congratulations. They are accepted and welcomed.
That's great. That's great.
Long time coming, but finally made it.
I'm fine. I'm fine this evening. Cornwell has decided that I'm going to be a couch now. So.
Well, that's what we are. We're a home to pets to sit on. That's all. That's all we're good for. So, welcome everybody. I have some news before we get started. I'm very excited. Again, my energy is always high when all the boys are here, so I think we're in for a good show. Also, if you were hanging out with us last Wednesday for our episode with Keith Knight, just guess what, fellas? Keith Knight's show on Hulu, Woke, just got picked up for a second season.
I saw that, yeah. Congratulations.
So congratulations, Keith. I want to think that all of our positive energy in looping his show on repeat for a weekend helped his ratings jump. So that's very exciting. Congrats to Keith. So I want to get into it. We've got a really cool guest. And I don't even remember when we met. It's been a while, but maybe we can get into that. But this guest has done so many things. I'm going to have to pull out the NPR voice, you guys. You know the NPR voice. So I'm going to read this off his wiki, and then we'll just get into it. And I won't read the whole thing because we've run out of time. So our guest tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is Shannon Eric Denton. Shannon is an American veteran storyteller and artist with credits at Cartoon Network, Warner Brothers, Jerry Bruckheimer Films, NBC, Disney, Sony, Toy Biz. Like the way I said that, Toy Biz, Marvel Entertainment, Fox Kids, Paramount, CBS Dimension Films, DC Comics, and Nickelodeon, and much more. And there's
no more. There's no more. That's everything.
No, there's like pages of it. And I think what I called Shannon in all of our signposts is that he is an iconic visual storyteller and creative icon. So I think with no further ado, let's bring him on in here. Hello, everybody. Shannon Eric Denton, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, everybody.
Hey.
Hello. Good evening.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Hope you liked that intro.
I did. I was glad you stopped when you did. It starts getting, I'm like.
I think it's always hard to hear about yourself, right?
It is. There's, that's always my least favorite part of any meeting, when you get there and you find out your manager didn't do any of the pre-work, and you actually have to tell people who you are and what you do.
Yeah. We all need people for that. Like, you shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah.
and I've always said, and this is one of the things I say to the guests, is that when we have these talks, they're kind of just like shop talk. I hate getting interviewed, and I'm sure you've all been there, where somebody holds a mic up to your face and goes, "So, who are you?" You have to do the work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's a
It would
sucker's
be easier if we were just dressed like the character we were drawing.
That would be.
So if you're working on Spider-Man, even if you're not built like Spider-Man, you're dressed as Spider-Man. And then we go, "Oh, Spider-Man."
Well, that is interesting, because I've known over maybe the past 10, 15 years, when young people find out that I do comics or I'm going to a convention, they ask me who I'm dressing up like. I was like,
yes.
Right? Like, no, that's not what I do. I appreciate everyone.
But this kind of goes along with some advice I give all young artists is if you're ever thought about cosplay, do it now, because chances are you, as a longtime artist, you are not going to get in better shape as you age. You're probably at your pinnacle now. So if there was ever a chance to put on those spider tights, rock it. Especially if your date that is accompanying you to the con also wants to cosplay, just go for it.
I love it.
Yeah.
There's a clock that's ticking going on.
Yeah.
And it's funny, we talked about this before on the podcast, because the first several conventions I went to, comic conventions, nobody was dressed up.
Yeah.
And I think when I was 15, I went to a science fiction convention. There were people there dressed up as Star Trek characters.
Yeah.
Right. And if somebody had actually gone to any of the comic book conventions dressed up as, Captain America, people would have been kind of like, "That's weird."
I
Which
think
is completely the opposite now.
They were doing it in the early 70s, though. The first conventions I went to were the Detroit Triple Fan Fairs, and they had people dressed up at those. That would be 73.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's always great, too, when you see in the back of whatever, I guess now everything's online, but, the back of the magazine, some pro friend of yours that went to those and actually did dress up. And there's the one photo that exists that somebody finally found and got into the magazine.
Yeah, I guess there was some people.
I was gonna talk to Shannon's point. You don't have to give up cosplay as you become an artist and go through the decades. You just start out as Spider-Man and end up as the Blob. You can still dress up.
That's great. So, all right, I'm going to monitor the chat room. So, Mike, maybe if you want to get the ball rolling. And,
So Shannon, why don't you give us a brief overview of your career, how you got in, what you were interested in, like, what was your path? Because everybody's path is similar we all were interested in the same kinds of things, but everybody's, trail ends up being a little bit different.
Yeah. And I think, going back to the, when the beautiful NPR voice was reading off, the list, the list a lot of times over your career, we're all professionals, and we have either ourselves or other people to feed, and so you maneuver around to where there's opportunities, and you do start off. I started off not sure if I wanted to go into comics or if I wanted to do children's books, and so I was really heavily pursuing the children's book illustration path, but I didn't know anybody that did children's book illustration, and I was working at this fancy 5-star restaurant in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And, I was talking to our chef who had been wooed out there from New York City. And she told me, she said, "Oh, I know a comic book guy." And I'm like, all right, well, this is the first. Because I did a lot of artists in Santa Fe, but they were all the gallery scene.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Right.
I got to be friends with a lot of them. They were like, go do what you want to do. And then you can always come back and do the gallery thing. If there's some bit of commercial art that you want to pursue, they were really encouraging. And so one night she gets on the phone, dials up a friend of hers in New York City, and hands me the phone. And 5 minutes into it, I realize I'm talking to Mike Kaluta in a kitchen while everybody's yelling about orders on either side of me. And it was great. He had me send him art, and then I got the nice letter back. It's like, child, please do not send me your original, because I didn't know what was going on. And, there was no internet, no Wizard magazines, none of that stuff at that point for me breaking in. So, and I tell people this a lot. Sometimes there's a freedom in not knowing what the game is or what the rules are. So you just go after everything because it's to you, it's kind of all the same till you find out it isn't.
Right. Yeah.
So I ended up, after, taking Mike's advice and meeting a few other people, pursuing, getting a job anywhere in comics, and ended up at Extreme Studios working with Rob. It was great. The group, we were talking about this the other day, how lucky we are, because that bullpen, for the most part, everybody still keeps in contact with each other and still chats. And our rival, Wildstorm guys and the Top Cow guys, we're all still friends. So, it was like kind of entering the workforce as an independent freelancer, where I think a lot of people, unless they were in New York City, they would bump into each other. But we went out into the world with this safety net. And, almost 10 months after I started Extreme, I was working at Fox Kids on the Marvel shows. And that wasn't something that I planned on. I just knew that, hey, Wolverine is sweet, and I wanted to get paid to draw some Wolverine. And went up to LA with a buddy from Orange County, and next thing I knew, we were working there.
So what was your, what were you doing at Extreme, and when you were in New Mexico, how were you, practicing and studying and figuring out, what was your dojo like?
Yeah, I mean, it was the same. I give a lot of people advice. I guest lecture at Cal Arts and all the different schools. Well, when I could go outside, and I always ask the kids, like, "Hey, do you play video games?" They're like, "Yes." "Do you what are your favorite shows?" And they list off all their favorite animes and everything. I go, "Okay, now imagine if that was all time you put into drawing." You didn't watch all those things, and you didn't play those games. Now all of a sudden you've got an extra, 6 to 7 hours in your day that you didn't have previously. So how bad do you want this thing? And so I was pretty focused at that point on getting the gig. So other than, making enough money to exist, food and rent, and the gas to get back and forth, I didn't go out for a few years, and that's all I did was draw. And, to be honest, when Murat and Rob hired me, they told me, they're like, we're not hiring you because you're great or you're even good. We're hiring you because we can see how much better you got between last month and this month and the month previous to that. And they were seeing the work. And so, they brought me in. It was like they basically gave me the opportunity to keep doing that. So that for me was kind of, the process. I would drive back and forth from New Mexico, Santa Fe to Comic-Con, and that's a 15-hour drive. And I would drive it straight through.
Wow.
Spend the whole day showing my portfolio. I couldn't afford a hotel room. So I would take a nap about an hour outside of San Diego, where I knew there was a rest area for an hour. And then I would do the drive back home.
Well, that's incredible.
So you'd come in, do your quick hit, and then.
Yeah. I couldn't.
How many times did you do that? How many times did you do that?
There were 3 San Diegos before I got hired. And to be honest, I got hired in Orlando, Florida, because I did not know how the industry worked. And I'm like, well, I went to Florida State, and I had a bunch of friends in Florida. So I'm like, I'll just go down to Florida where Universal is, and then maybe I'll get a job working in animation at Disney or something. And, because I didn't know that all the Disney animation was done at the time in LA. They later moved to Florida, but at that time they weren't there, and I didn't know that. So I drove all the way out there, was exhausted because I couldn't afford a hotel room. So I'd done like a 3-day trip in a day and a half. And, because I was young, I still had the energy to go like, I'm going to go to the comic book store. So I walk into the comic book store after driving for like 20 hours. And they're like, hey, there's a convention going on, right? And I'm like, there is? And they're like, yeah, it's just right there. And so I walked across the street, paid my $5 to get into the convention, saw Murat, showed him my work. He's like, hey, can you start work on Monday? And I went, yes. And then I turned around, got back in my car, drove to my buddy that I was going to crash with, told him I was taking a nap. And then I turned around and drove back cross country and started work at Extreme on that Monday.
Wow.
So, you know,
That's incredible.
I think you win all awards for the power of optimism, just driving right through.
it's you know, it was definitely the flip side of it is there were less people wanting to do it. So if you were working really hard, you could do it. Now, I feel for young people because there's so many. I mean, they can watch us, 4 professionals talking right now about, and get tips and tricks and, figure out what they should and shouldn't be doing, that they shouldn't be mailing their originals to Mike Kaluta in New York City. Mm-hmm. But because there's so much access, there's so much more competition. So I feel like it's still about the same. It's just a different playing field now, only that the kids going into the workforce now have leapfrogged their learning so much because they have access to all of this.
You know what? I've said this in a couple of podcasts in the past, and this is something that always comes back up when we talk to creatives, is that there's something, it's a special X factor about just being fearless and having your ass in the chair and just jumping out the window, metaphorically.
Yeah.
That has propelled a lot of people. And I agree with you, but I also think that there's so much stuff now that I don't think people are as fearless as we used to be.
I was nervous coming on here with you guys, and I've known you for a long time. I mean, I think when you see, we all of us artists, no matter what level you are, and I'm friends with enough much bigger name, better artist buddies to know that we all do the thing where you're on the internet and you're inspired / depressed.
Yeah.
We all do that because we all want to get better at our craft. We all like what we do. There's things that we want to do that our friends are envious of, and vice versa. And I think that's normal, but we know that because of our experience now, and we've gotten a beer together at the bar and actually had those honest conversations. As a kid, sitting there looking at the world, having access to the world, that would be terrifying.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's just I think the kind of like the baseball card stats of all this have gone up in skill and access, but also down in fearlessness.
Yeah,
I think people are a lot more fearful to do stuff.
Well, I also think
Shannon. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think Shannon touched on something interesting there about how many hours a day are you putting in.
Yeah.
Because when you look back at the just the bottom level of skill that you would see in illustration and even newspaper ads, going back to the early part of the last century, all the original Disney animators, the 9 Old Men, they didn't have television. They didn't have the opportunity to spend that much time doing anything other than drawing.
Yeah. They could drink or golf. That was it.
And, so I think that there's a real problem for young people now because there's just everybody struggles when they're learning, and as you said, we're still struggling every day. So the temptation to just, oh my God, I got to get away from this. Mm-hmm. Maybe when we were young, you could go out and take a walk, or you couldn't control what you watched on television in those days.
Yeah.
So maybe you listen to a record or something, and then you get back to it. But now you can go binge watch something for the next 10 hours if you feel like it.
Oh, or you could just do this on Instagram forever.
Oh,
literally, just.
Well, they call that doom scrolling.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I
think in this case it would be gloom scrolling.
Nice.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that when it's definitely different generational, because when we were trying to get in, there were less people trying to get in, and there were less people in.
Yeah.
And because we were basically limited to competing with people mostly in North America.
Mm-hmm.
People in North America that had access to North America. And now any 19, 20-year-old is in competition with all the 19 and 20-year-olds everywhere in the world, and everybody's wired in, and they're all on Instagram, and they're all taking classes, and they're all, listening to podcasts, and just, all you have to do is go on Instagram, and there's thousands and thousands and thousands of new artists that are like popping on every day. I mean, we would just talk to Phil Alora a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about how they're getting storyboard guys from Africa now. I mean, when I started, there was no way you could be a storyboard guy from Africa. You'd have to come from Africa to America to be a storyboard artist, you know? So
I think about I was fortunate that a lot of the old school Filipino guys that started in comics in the 70s were a lot of my mentors in animation. You know, they'd moved out to LA and you know, they would tell me these crazy stories like my story with the driving, but then they can outdo me 1,000 times with their stories of like, so there were 30 guys in a 1-bedroom apartment.
Right.
Cots. They were telling me about this, and you know, it was the way to like help guys in, and then they would get them get up, you know, a couple of first paychecks, and then the older guys would go, okay, here's the part of town you should go get an apartment in, and then, you know, they would look out for each other. And now they can just stay in the Philippines, you know. Now, you know, and that gets, you know, goes around the world. You know, there's you know, the studios have access to worldwide talent at this point.
Yeah.
And I guess especially because of the pandemic, that's really, I mean, you're in LA, so you see how that's directly affecting everybody and everything in the way that the pandemic is sort of forced open because you need talent.
Yeah.
And so they're saying, you know, now we can't everybody in the same building, so we'll get this person from Singapore, and we'll get this good person from over here, and this good person from over there.
Yeah, and for the young artists listening, I think the studios, we've always been able to do it. I kind of earned my rep here in LA that I wasn't gonna flame out and I hit every deadline. So once I had kids, I usually was able to work from home 3 or 4 days a week if I wanted to, as long as my supervisor was like, yeah, as long as you hit the deadline, I don't care. So, you know, I'd come in and be social, but then on certain days I would spend raising my kids while I was boarding. And I think there was that trust. And I think the pandemic kind of laid open that most artists are going to do their work if it's their job because they're professionals. And so it's that fear has been taken away on the studio side. But then I just read a statistic that so many people are putting in so many more hours because you're sitting at home and you're working and you don't really have anything else to do, so you might as well keep working. So now it's that whole the other end of it, which I'm curious to see what comes out at the other end of the pandemic is, are people going to be better at going, all right, I put in my 8-hour day. They're paying me for an 8-hour day. It's time to go play golf.
Ding,
or
I'm
drink
done.
wine. Yeah. Check out a work, you know, because I think we all like our craft and we like what we do, and we're very fortunate that we get to do this. But you know, also too, you got to kind of it's a long haul, you know, this as a career. And
yes, I always say art is long, and
Yeah.
what you're doing at 20 may not be what you're doing at 30, and you may not be interested at it all at 40. You may be doing something completely different.
Yeah, I mean, that's time you could be putting into your own comic, or you know, a pitch Bible for an animated series you want to shop around, or working on your painting or sculpting or anything else, or just turning that part of, you know, turning art off for a while. Some people need to do that. So
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see, you know, a year from now, you know, if that balance, you know, if it's found where the studio is a little bit more forgiving with like, we trust you, you get your work done, we like that, but then also the artist knowing like, I have value, and then giving that back to themselves. So
Yeah, I think a lot of, I mean, we all start from the point of passion because we love to do this. And then you marry that to doing it to make a living, which is always a difficult marriage.
Yeah.
And then at some point, some people go, well, I want to just go back to the love of doing it. And I don't want to connect it to the grind of, you know, being in a studio or having to produce something on a deadline. And some people seem to float back in and out of that. Like they get out and then they come back in. And you've done a lot of different things. I mean, you've done comics, storyboards, you've done writing. So it seems like you floated in and out of different parts and different phases. And was that something that happened naturally because you were interested, or is it just happened because of the way, you know, opportunity?
Both, because you know, I think Jamar kind of hit it at the beginning too. Like I realize now, you know, I do have ADD. There was an H in there when I was younger. I don't have the hyper part quite as much as I did when I was young, but the rest of it's there. So, and also going back to the not knowing, you know, to me, you know, Wolverine and the X-Men was still Wolverine and the X-Men, whether it was working at Fox Kids or whether I was going to try and, you know, follow you guys and, you know, get on one of those books, you know, after working at Extreme. To me, it was just, I was chasing what I wanted to do, not realizing that people like to assign you a role in life. You know, if I have friends that are comedy writers that are jealous of their friends winning Emmys for dramas, and vice versa, the guy's winning the Emmy for the drama is jealous of the comedy writer that has an infinity pool that looks out of all over Los Angeles because you know, his comedy is on its 900th season, you know, and you know, we're all you know, successful in our careers, but I know that even when you're successful, people kind of want you to stay in a lane, and it's really difficult if you don't see the lanes. And for a long time, for me, it was just I want to go do this. I love comics and I love animation. To me, it was all part of like these characters that I liked. Trying to get my stuff out in either format. And I've worked in live action. I've worked in video games. You know, it's one of those things that like when people look at my resume, they're like, well, what are you? You know, and they want you to give them an answer. And I'm like, well, I'm all these things, but also the things I haven't even learned that I know how to do yet.
Right.
Oh,
Shannon, I had a question real quick.
Yeah.
So from the beginning of this, when you were studying your craft and getting in cars and driving halfway across the country just on a dice roll, and so say like let's start at the extreme thing. When that landed and you were like, cool, on Monday I'm going to be in the studio drawing and kind of making these things happen. Where was the thing in your head that clicked and said, okay, time to go find the next thing, or time to start looking for the next thing? What kept you from staying?
In that particular moment, it was the you mean staying in Orlando or staying in, you know,
yeah.
For me, that was something I'd been chasing for a while. The opportunity was there.
Yeah.
I had $60 and I thought at the time that'll get me to across America. You know, I had a Honda. That thing went forever. It was a 79 Honda, you know, in the 90s with baling wire holding the hood on. But I couldn't get over like 70 or the hood would fly off. So I had to cruise. But you know, I knew that I could do it. And then when I got out there, I'm like, there's got to be somebody to take pity on me, to give me a couch or something till I got a first paycheck. And so I just kind of, you know, did a lot of it on faith, and then, you know, trusting in my own skills to pull it off. My dad was military, so I grew up moving. I know how terrifying moving is for a lot of friends. I have some friends that they've never left the city they grew up in. You know, they're in big cities, but you know, other than flying to a comic convention, they don't really get in their car and just drive across America.
Right.
We had to move like every 6 months growing up. My dad was in a program in the military where he trained other pilots. And so he wasn't away off in Vietnam, you know, anymore like he was when I was young, but he was around, but we had to move constantly. So I think that fear was taken away from me as a child, that going somewhere where I didn't know anything or know anybody, you know, that I would be able to make it. So that you know, that helped in my journey.
Yeah.
And then I think the rest of it was just opportunities. I think I've always chased things I wanted, and luckily I was able to get on a lot of the things that I wanted to do. And then going back to the other part of the question, Mike, and then sometimes it's like, hey, I just got laid off here. Everybody's looking for work. Oh, wait a minute. I'm also do comics, and I just heard they're looking for an editor over here on this, or they're looking for a penciler on that. So, you know, I would just jump, you know, and I think there's pros and cons to that in your career. I have other friends that they'll just sit tight and they wait for the next opportunity for the exact thing they want to do.
Right.
And I think I've always been more like, well, a gig's a gig, and as long as I'm getting paid and I'm learning something, that's a good gig, even if it paid less than the previous thing I had.
Yeah, I guess that's a good attitude to have, because we talked about this before. People think that if I go to this other gig, but I'm not getting paid more money, that's a loss. Right?
Yeah.
And this one is not as prestigious, or is perceived to be as prestigious as the other gig. That's a loss. And so you do this thing to yourself where you pass up opportunities which may pay off in the long term, because you think the short term, you know, we have to keep climbing this ladder, you know.
Yeah, that's and I think that's valid too, if that's your personality set. Like you guys all, I'm sure, have people that got into this business that you're friends with that, you know, personality wise, like they couldn't hack the whole moments in between gigs. Like that's very stressful. I have so many friends that have, you know, they joined, whether they're a school teacher, fireman, military, whatever, but that's their job till they get out. If there's not like some pandemic or something that happened to them, or a recession 10 years ago that threw them off. And so, you know, their career path is very much a linear one. And I think when you get into what we do, you know, even if you're assigned, you know, Superman or an X-Men book, or, you know, it's your, you know, at some point management may decide to make a shift, or there's a movie coming out and they want another direction. And regardless of whether you've got your fan base and you're pretty comfortable in that seat, that's not your seat. They can take it away from you. And that's,
yeah. Well, that's a great point.
That's the hard thing to see when you're young. Do you guys know who Alfredo Alcala is?
Yeah.
So I was a huge fan of his. My very first week at Fox, as I'm getting taken into the office and being told I've got this gig, I'm seeing this older gentleman walking out with his box, and I'm like, I wonder what's going on with that guy. Where he's got what? You know, I didn't know the box thing at that point, and so I found out later I am now replacing Alfredo because I'm younger and I'm cheaper, and I would do what the boss wanted. And, you know, I was mortified. That was my first week working for the studio, you know, and they're all like that. They will roll to what makes the most sense for them. Now, mind you, I told all the other Filipino guys that trained me, and they're like, that's hilarious. Let's go get lunch with Alfredo. And so Alfredo and I got to be friends, and it all worked out for us. But I was sick to my stomach.
Yeah.
They're so excited that I'm getting paid actual money to draw, and good money at the time, to find out that was how the studio was going to be. It would have been ridiculous of me to think that, because I knew that even if I draw for the next 50 years, I'm never going to be at the draftsmanship level that dude was. And so your reward for being a master at your craft and really good, but with, you know, is that it's someday some young punk who's cheaper than you is going to replace you. And so I was like, all right, well, that's how these studios see us. I'm going to work super, super hard from 9 to 5 while I'm here, or 9 to 6, or whatever the studio rules are, and give them 100% of me during these hours. And then after those hours, those are my hours. So it's a really good,
it's a culture shock, right? It's a kind of like a shock to the system. It's just like when if you tell students, oh, well, you know, the reason why cartoons are on TV is so you'll see the commercials for cereal. They're like, what? No. The commercials are for some other reason. It's like if Captain Crunch doesn't buy ads, your cartoon gets canceled.
What?
Or the guys who are training you, and you're like, that show that you worked on inspired me to get into the business. And then they're like, we were drunk that year. And you're like, whole year? You're like, oh yeah, everybody was drunk that year. You know, and you're like,
the whole year. I love it. Well, Shannon, and some of your studio gigs, how often do you run into young crew members or staff members who are still fighting with that, I guess, young modality, like, oh, well, we're just going to hang out and chill over here, and they gave us scooters, and there's a sand thing that we can all hang out on, but you're going to work, you know? Do you just kind of see that a lot?
I run into that a lot less than I run into the overworking. Like, you know, as a shout out to all the fellow young people I work with, usually my advice as a senior person is go get on the scooter, but go do it at home. You know, go take your lady out, go, you know, get out of the studio, you know, don't be here all day. Yeah. It is a great environment they provide for us, and, you know, but it's overworking that I think is, you know, everybody's chasing that Emmy because they haven't been nominated for one, or they haven't won one. I've been nominated a lot, by the way, so if anybody wants to give me one, I'll still take it. But not been on a winning Emmy show. But actually, that's not true. Con Man, I think we got a couple Emmys on that. But you know, it isn't the thing that you remember. And when I talk at Cal Arts or Art Center or any of these art schools, they always want to ask you, what was your favorite thing you worked on? And they want you to say that Oscar-winning thing, or that thing that everybody acknowledges was the best art ever show, project, comic, whatever. And it's not. It's like, the year I worked with, Dave Stevens, and he was constantly driving Bill nuts, and you these stories of the people that you worked with, and the relationships that you build on a certain production that sometimes you take with you for the rest of your life. There are groups of people that I've been fortunate enough to work with, and I'm sure you guys run into this, where if they're on something, they're going to reach out to you and talk you up and say, hey, I got you a job on this show if you want it, and right. That will carry with you your whole career. And there's nothing better than it. It doesn't always work out. Sometimes you're like, hey, I'm already over here with this other thing. But, just that
your peer group, right? Your peer group continues to grow, right? And
yep. It just keeps spreading. And so, if you're doing it right, if you're so focused in the work, but if there was a way to guarantee that you got an Emmy every time, or that every movie you worked on was going to be a $200 million blockbuster, these studios spend so much money to figure that stuff out. They would do it every time. Mm-hmm. So unfortunately, the reality is sometimes you're miserable on the thing that got the Oscar nomination, and the thing that was a complete piece of crap, but you made as good as it could be, but it was a bad idea before you got started. That's going to be the thing that you're going to remember the most fondly later in your career, because the people around you made every day going into work enjoyable. That's right. That's the part of the industry that's, what we're doing right now. I mean, this is I'm not even out of the house, but I was about to say, this is my first time out of the house in forever.
No, that's fantastic. Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, having gone back and forth between comics, which can be very personal, even drawing Superman or Batman or Spider-Man or X-Men, it's still more personal because there's less people that you go through. And then working in animation, which is completely a team effort, and it goes through literally hundreds of hands sometimes before something is up on the screen. Do you have a preference for that, or do you find that you like dipping in one for a while, then like dipping it, like you get something by moving back and forth?
I'll be honest, I haven't done near as much drawing as you guys in comics, and I regret that I didn't, because I kind of got into animation at a point. So whenever I would jump back in, it usually was as a writer or a creator on things. And so that freedom that comes from making comics, where it's like, here's my art. I struggle with this sometimes because my career has been built, I would say there's the two different kinds of, we'll just go to like character designers, but that applies to every part of the art process, which is there's the person whose style is so distinct that, they're not getting work on all these shows, but eventually somebody picks them to design a show and the whole show looks like theirs. Mm-hmm. And then there's, and to his credit, he's got more Emmys than any of my friends, my buddy Dale, who is the character designer on The Simpsons. Matt Groening did a couple of comic strips, did a few character designs, set the look of that show, created the world of that show. But here's Dale drawing like Matt Groening for the last 30 years.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Like everything that comes out of Dale's pencil looked like, it could have come out of Matt's pencil. And that's the reality of most of the jobs, is that you adapt to what the show is. My style when I draw, it's hard because, I'm like, well, should I draw like this or should I draw it? Because I can draw in multiple styles because I have to for the day job.
Yeah.
So, taking the long way around, I'm always very jealous of you guys who can, going back to the beginning with like the whole, like, oh, I wish, you would gloom scrolling, as Brett said. I love that when you guys draw comics, it still looks like you. Like I love your work and pick it up and know who's doing what. I don't know anymore because I didn't establish that base, I think, at a young enough age. So there's the flip side to it. In comics, you get the freedom to have your name on there, and it says, this person did this, and everybody sees it, and they know you did it. When I was working on Jimmy Neutron, probably more kids saw that than anything I've worked on. But, they're not staying to watch the credits at the end and see who did what. Other than the people who worked on the movie, they're out of there. So, that's the flip side of it. You get paid pretty well, but you're kind of anonymous in this group. And then there's that freedom that comes with comics of, you're getting to present your vision of how you see the world and how you present it to others and hope that people respond to it.
So it's almost like, because I talk about this, I think it's almost like, what is your personality? There's some people that do working in animation and working on a team, and they fit right in, and that's like the best thing for them.
Yeah.
And then there's other people that they don't play well with others, and they have a hard time compromising, because that's part of the job too. Is you have to do a lot of compromising. Sometimes you have to compromise because of deadline. we're always compromising because of deadline. That's probably the most, or you go like, well, I really want to make that purple, and that person wants to make it green, and I friggin' hate green, and I hate making things green, and they don't click.
Mm-hmm.
There was
when Shannon was talking about the difference between the comics and all that, I was thinking back when I'd been doing comics nonstop for about 15 years when I first started doing storyboards. And I had the opposite reaction at that time, where now I could get off of the stage and just concentrate on storytelling and just fold back into this big crowd and not have to be so worried about every line, hopefully reproducing correctly and all that. Yeah. So that was interesting to think. It was because I had an opposite reaction at that time, at that later date.
Yeah, it's I think depending where you are in your career, probably your life, the answer is going to be different. Like, I know that how I'm answering some of this stuff now would probably be different than how I answered it in my 20s.
Sure.
So I think that's something that you're aware of as you get older, because you have the hindsight to look back on it. But it's they're both storytelling. I love them both. So for me, it's something that I'm working on comics right now while I'm still directing on animated stuff. So, for me, like, it's always been dual. It's just that, that's how I channel my ADD. When I'm over here focused on this too much, then I jump over onto this, and then it feels fresh. So when I go back to that, then it's fresh again. And if that system works for me, it would drive my wife bananas working like that. 'Cause she works in the business too, and we have completely different approaches to how we are creative. And I think that's another thing too, that as you get experience, you start to realize, like, oh, this is the kind of person I am. This is the kind of artist I am. I used to get in so much trouble at Fox because all the production managers and the producers are like, he screws around all the time. And then my boss had to go to him and be like, he's like 3 months ahead of schedule, because I work in these really fast bursts. And then I want to go bug everybody. So working in an environment for me where I have access to all of you, where I can go like, hey, what are you into today? What are you looking at? What's,
right.
I have a real hard time I'm better now, but back then I was
like, probably, go back to your cubicle.
Exactly. It took me a while to figure out. So, it all worked.
I've gone along. I think probably the majority of people who do this have ADD. To some degree.
Yeah.
I should have written a thesis on this. That's a really interesting aspect.
I'm curious.
I was talking to someone one time, and they were trying to. We were discussing the process of how you get everything to come together.
Yeah.
And so, what does your mind look like? How's it working? And the closest analogy I could think of was the bedroom in Poltergeist, when he opens the door and all that crap's flying around all over the place. And it seems to me that the process is you sit there being buffeted by all this stuff, and then you suddenly get the instinct and you grab it all and throw it down, and it lines up. But I know people who can start at the beginning and go through to the end in a linear way, and it's just astonishing to me how.
Same, it's like magic, and they think what I'm doing is the whole, like, I'm going to come into work and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to draw till the end of the workday, and then I put my pencil down and it's just all one flow.
Yeah.
That's magic to me. I can't work like that. And they think it's crazy that I can screw around for 7 of the 8-hour day and then still get an 8-hour day done. And I'm like, but that's how it works for me.
Right. And that, that's the thing that even with the magazine and with this podcast that I find really the most interesting is that we're all creative. We're all trying to tell a story. We're all using the same tools, but everybody's process is different. They cross over and they have commonalities. But I know that there's some people like they would come and juggle all day, and then like 5 minutes, boom, they would do their job, right? And other people come in and sit down, like you said, and their desk is neat, and there's other people whose desk looks like a bomb went off in it, and but that's not chaos to them.
No,
right? That's not chaos to them. I think, and it's hard when you're young because you don't have enough of a track record to figure out how you're still figuring it all out, especially when you're in art school and then you come right out of art school. And if you come out of art school and you're on your own, as opposed to being in a studio, because in a studio, they give you a task and you must perform that task.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a comic book artist, you go into your room and then you have to figure out you're given the task, but nobody's coming in like, I saw you get out of your cubicle 5 times today.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be very self-disciplined. I see that as also being a big difference between probably working in animation and working in comics. I think when you're working in comics, not that you are not self-disciplined working in a studio, but then you have that, just like when you're in school, you have this exterior force guiding, saying, turn that in. You need that Monday.
Yeah.
And some people completely fail at that if they don't have that device, the pressure. And some people really need, we know artists that need that pressure. They will skip around and procrastinate or whatever. And then because they need that absolute pressure to force them to sit down, and then they can do it.
Yeah, that's that diamond you're pressing. I need that. I need the pressure.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really get that when you're in a studio because you have to keep producing.
Right. It's like a marathon, not a sprint situation.
That process thing you were talking about reminded me back in the early '80s. I was in a studio with Bill Sienkiewicz, and he had a room section off because he smoked, so his section had a partition around it. But his room literally looked like an earthquake had just happened. I mean, stuff all over the floor, stuff falling off the shelf, splatters everywhere, and everything. I don't know if he still works that way, but back then, and at that same time, I went to visit Kurt Swan, who was still drawing Superman, and in his studio had a carpeted floor, very nice, neat room. He had his drawing board and a tabouret, and on the tabouret was a pencil, a kneaded eraser. Hanging from it was a triangle and a glass of wine. That was it. Nothing else is visible.
I love it.
Just would sit there.
What did he draw with the wine?
Circles.
That I guess that put him in the mood to go up and away, I suppose.
I love it. Hey, Shannon, I wanted to. I prepared some images, and I thought maybe this would be a good point in the podcast where I can share them. And there's no order, so maybe you can just touch on or give some bullet points on the projects you've worked on, and maybe this will jog some questions out of the room. They're dead as doornail quiet because they're all just very attentively listening to what we're talking about. So, all right, let me share the screen.
I have a cue for you. I have a cue for you, Jamar.
Yeah. Okay. I love it.
Avengers.
All right, cool. So yeah, I'm just going to go through these, and if you want to tell me to move on, or I can surprise you, however you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the whole my career being all over the place, we'll just we'll just go through it like that. But Avengers. So I've worked on I think 4 different Marvel Avengers animated series, whether as a board artist, or a character designer. Last few shows I worked on was as a writer. This was one where I was a writer. So that's why that's in there.
Mm-hmm.
And how did you move into writing?
This is on the comic side. I don't know about you guys, but I wanted to do my own books, and I didn't have the money to pay a co-writer, so I was like, well, I guess I'll write them myself. And I don't know if you guys had proper training and actually started off actually writing at a keyboard and writing scripts, but I did what a lot of my artist friends do that get into storytelling, which is I would draw out the story, which works, but it's a lot more work than figuring out where you're going and then sitting down and typing it out. So now actually I write like a writer, but and put it all down on the keyboard first and then go draw it. It's so it started off in comics. Just I wanted to do my own comics, and I was doing those at night after the Fox Kids gig. And my first TV work came because I was calling on a gig for a board scripted show where the board artist is telling the story. And I didn't know that they weren't a board scripted show. They were just a scripted show. And they said, hey, are you calling about the writing gig? And I said, yes. And then I was a writer on that show.
Wow.
I wouldn't have their info if I didn't know what I was doing, which is half true. I kind of knew what I was doing, and I knew who to call. I just had bad information from a buddy, and but it all worked out. And then that sort of put me in the hot seat. The diamond was being compressed at that moment, as I was like, all right, I've read a lot of scripts, I can do this. And then I highly recommend that if you have friends that are professionals that are good at their craft, that you be honest with them and tell them the situation you got into, and sometimes they'll take pity on you and help you through it. And it's kind of how I broke into TV.
There's all that formatting to write. You got to learn that too, right? How to do the.
Yeah, but from 10 years at that point, I'd been storyboarding and working off TV scripts for 10 years. So I was pretty familiar with the format. I knew like what it needed to look like and how it needed to go together. I just didn't have the training that somebody coming out of USC would, as far as knowing that going into the business. But I picked it up through osmosis.
Shannon, there's a question.
Yeah.
Our good buddy Angela Sky, hey Angela, asks, did writing come naturally to you just like drawing did?
I'll be honest. I think I was 15 years into my career before I realized I think I was a writer more than I was an artist. Writing came really naturally to me. The drawing, I feel like I'm constantly having to make sure that those skills stay sharp.
Yeah.
There's a lot of practice that goes into the whole muscle memory and making sure that you can still do what you want to do and learn. So for me, it was this exciting discovery that I loved writing. Before it was more about the final product. I loved comics or I liked TV shows, and it was a piece that I needed to know how to do. Mm-hmm. And I think, there is that advantage to, once again, not knowing or not having money that throws you into that situation of, I need to learn how to do all these other parts. Because I can letter a comic too. I'm horrible at it, but I've done it professionally. And, I've been a prop designer on TV shows, and I am horrible at props, but very charming, and they didn't want to fire me, and they needed a prop guy. So, it worked out at that time, and I got better at it.
Yeah.
So I think that sometimes throwing yourself into the deep end of the pool is a really great way to learn, as long as you're willing to put in the work. So yeah, for me, the writing is a very enjoyable experience. I still love to draw, but I think going back to my knowledge of how many of my friends and the world around me, like I have these very specific visions as an artist of what I would like to be able to do. And I've already given up on most of the ones that I'm like, well, I'm not going to be Norman Rockwell. I'm just going to go enjoy Norman Rockwell when I go to the museum, or and writing, to me, I don't feel that. There's scripts where I read but I've never read one and been like, man, this formatting is more genius than anybody else's. I'm like, oh, this guy came up with a good story and really got me, it kind of gets me fired up to jump into it in that side.
Shannon, do you want to talk about this image, and then there's another question?
Yeah. So going back to Alfredo and me realizing early in my career that the reward for hard work was getting fired at some point when you get too expensive. I realized I needed to work on my own stuff. And I was coming home at that time from working on the X-Men cartoon and then drawing Deadpool at night, which was, and I love Marvel, and I love that I had access to Stan Lee. I mean, Stan was such a sweetheart with me, because I think in our first meeting, they looked over to me and they asked me a question. I don't remember anything. I just went, "You're Stan Lee." And that was, and then Stan said, "We're going to lunch." And that was the end of it. I was mortified, but that was the beginning of a long friendship. So for me, my time at Stan. So, I realized, like, all right, I'm putting in all these hours on Marvel stuff, which I don't own. And, and I love it, but I already had the day job getting to draw all the X-Men characters. And I was doing development on Captain America and all these other shows that, we were constantly doing new shows with Stan that didn't make it to the air. So I was getting my Marvel fix during the day. And so that was when I was deciding, all right, I need to do my own comics. So started doing my own comics. And then about 5 years into doing that, launched my publishing company in 2000, just so I had a place to put some stuff that, was very personal to me. And maybe I didn't want to do as an image book. And from Comic Works, we had a partnership with Stan. We were, had a partnership with AOL back in the day. We got a TV show on the air that ran for 2 seasons. And most of what it does now is I do prose books through Comic Works. So our YA Actionopolis line is all, came out of that original thought that I needed to put this extra energy that I had into my own stuff instead of putting it more into the Marvel machine.
Gotcha.
As much as I love Marvel, but it was just like I realized at that point, like I wanted to do what's, I was getting enough Spider-Man during the day. I wanted to do what Stan did, which is create, my things.
Right. All right, I want to go to this next image and then we'll do the question. That's really cool. I'm pressing the wrong thing.
Oh yeah, this was a fun one. Another Avengers show that I worked on. Zero, I did the designs on these, I believe. This was one of those where Marvel was kind of in transition in the animation side before they started up Marvel Animation. It was for all of us that worked in TV, I know that it used to be you'd make a show and they go find a network for it, but it seemed like it was always on different networks. It wasn't like there was no Disney owning things. So, some of the stuff I worked on in the 90s was Fox Kids. This one I think was syndicated. So it was on at weird times. Sometimes it'd be on at 5 a.m. Sometimes it would be on later. I think it started a little bit on Cartoon Network, but that was a while ago, so I'm not sure. But it's definitely more of a cohesive machine now, working on a lot of this material than it was when when I started in this business.
Yeah, we were talking about this the other day, that Brett and I started in 96, and we went through that change from Kids WB and Fox to them going away, and then the rise of Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network, and the business changed, and people were hopping out of seats, and the Powerpuff Girls became really big, and there was a lot of stuff like SpongeBob that became big because he was on for a long time, and the audience kind of eventually caught up to it. And that was a different landscape than there is now, because now the streaming landscape is changing everything.
Yeah, it's definitely more gig economy for the artist now and the creator, which is, I kind of wish it had been the other way around, that at the later end of my career, because when I started, I was I was on staff with Fox Kids. So when there was a new show, they rolled us onto the new show. You were still wanting to do great work, and you were trying to impress all the new people coming in, and you're always wanting to impress Stan, but there wasn't this fear that, I'm going to get fired at the end of the production, or that I'm not going to get picked up because I'm not in this clique. There was a little bit more stability, I think, during that like while you guys were over at Warner Brothers, we were over at Fox, but it was the same kind of thing. I'm friends with most of those Warner Brothers guys in that period, because that's where I went right after Fox Kids. And there's definitely, I know that they say that, you're probably getting better work if everybody's competing and everything, but there's also, sometimes you get better work by people being relaxed and confident in what they do. So you definitely, the landscape is definitely a lot different, and it's changing rapidly right now. There's a lot of work right now, but it's way shorter term work than it's ever been. the turnaround on the seasons is insanely fast at the moment. What they used to spend a year doing, they're getting done in 3 to 4 months now on some shows.
Well, because they're hiring more people. Like they're hiring not like 4 storyboard people. They're hiring like 12 storyboard people.
Yes. I mean, you both worked on Batman Beyond, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. So most fans, by the time that they were canceling that show, you guys had been off that show for a while. Because I remember that was one of the first times where they really just like tripled up the crews and had everybody getting through 5 seasons of the show in a lot less time than, the actual old school way of going, hey, we're going to do this over 5 years. And I know that by the time the show was, supposedly going off the air, most of the people had been off of it for a few years already.
Yeah. Because what the magic number was 52 for syndication?
Yeah.
Right. I don't know if that's still the same now. If syndication is still the same, but yeah, and I even when I was on Fairly Odd Parents, they did the same thing. It became hot, and then they decided to hire a bunch more people. So I was supposed to get, I think, 7 shows, and I got like 3 because they just brought all these other people on and decided to just like crank it all out.
Yeah, and that's become more the norm now. So,
well, I remember towards the end of Batman Beyond, they were also working on the Return of the Joker. So they were pulling people and trying to get everything done. And I remember at the end of that show, there was a few shows I think I did half or more of the show, which is a lot of work, as you know.
Insane amount of work. And the fact that the fact that people are getting it done now, that's part of why too. When you look at boards now, there's such a difference too in what we were doing at one point in our career versus what we're doing at this point. It's definitely a lot looser, but then at the same time, you're doing these full animatics now where studios have got you timing everything out and dropping in dialogue, audio. Yeah, it's definitely a changing landscape, and I only throw that out there not as a complaint, but just part of the career. I think if you want to do this and make money from other people, is you constantly have to keep changing and you constantly have to keep learning. And if that's not appealing to you, then that may not be a career path.
Shannon, I have some questions before I get to the question in the room. So these are 2 studio questions. My first question is, as most of you, I've never done studio work, but I have a bunch of buddies besides all of you who are in like stop motion animation and things like that. And I always hear from everybody about there's always the hunt for the next gig and the hunt for the next thing. And you got to line stuff up for the next thing. And this is running out and the next thing. Is there a period of time when the studio starts getting tense because we're wrapping up? Like, as it seems like there would be kind of like a clash in morale. Like, yeah, we're wrapping up and when there's crunch and all that other stuff. But at the same time, it's like, well, shit, what happens after this wraps? So, like, what does that do to the morale of the bullpen as it gets closer to the end of a show? If that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you want me to jump in or?
Yeah, I was just.
I don't know if I'm. I was. The whole point. This problem with being on these things is I know you guys are expecting me, but then I'm like, I wonder what Brett thinks about this. What's Mike's opinion on? I like what you do, but I definitely think it affects morale and more because of the turnaround. The studios think they're getting what they want, but what ends up happening, because I've just recently come off a couple of supervising director gigs, is you're losing people to other networks before they got to the end because they know you have no commitment to them. Right. So then it becomes like, well, I'm going to go draw this over here and go, jump ship before you kick me off this ship.
Right.
And I always tell people it's the only industry where on your first day of work, they go, we love you. We're great. We're so glad you're working here. Could you sign right here? This is the day we're laying you off. And going in, your end date. Wow. And it used to be that end date was further away. It was a little bit more like being a teacher in that you had, a good year's worth of work. And then over the summer, you were going to try and find, hopefully they could find you some freelance at the studio to float you until the next season rolled around. And then you just keep going on the same show. And it's definitely gotten much quicker in the turnaround now. And so, you know, on one hand, you're getting some really talented people, but you're not getting any sort of, I don't know that you're getting everybody's best work. You're getting people who are really good at working in that environment.
Right.
You know, and so I feel bad that there's a lot of people that don't know what they really could do if they were allowed to blossom.
So what about and I want to hear what Mike and Brett have to say,
Yeah.
but what about when you guys get the call in the middle of a season that you got picked up for another season? Does that change anything? Or are people still on their way out the door?
I mean, I don't know you guys, but I think it's always, that seems like it's always a good boost to morale.
Right.
You know, it's a job. I mean, as much as you love this stuff. So if somebody else has already made you an offer for more money later, it's always a conversation you can go have with your boss or whoever the line producer is and say, hey, I want to stay here, but they're offering me this. Can you match it? You know, and I'll stay here. So, you know, that conversation thing is something too that I think some people are way better at. There are some people that know that they should do that from the beginning. I was not great at that when I was young. So instead of stressing out my producers and production managers that I, you know, was running around talking to people, even though I was getting my work done, I'm like, why are you stressed? I realized as I got more experience, I could go to them beforehand and just be like, you may see me running around. All the work's done. It's on the server. Go check. The boss loves it. You got nothing to worry about. We're ahead of schedule. And then that changed the relationship and the dynamic I had with those people, because now they're like, oh, okay, well, he's hooking us up, versus like, man, he eats a lot of donuts.
Right. I was going to say, you're always at the taco truck.
He's eating a full crew of donuts.
There are a lot of actors in Hollywood that I know really well from the bagel cart at Warner Brothers, because I don't.
That's great. Well, Mike and Brett, did you want to touch on that question I had, or?
You know, I always feel a little like odd man out in some of these when I talk about this with Shannon and other friends, because I've never worked in a studio a single day of my life. So I've always worked from home, even back in the FedEx days or the fax days and all that. But I do remember, you know, if you got picked up and you really enjoyed what you were doing, and, you know, people have been kicking around ideas for new story directions and all that, it was always great to hear that. And then when the show was ending, that was always a drag, because, of course, right at the beginning, you wouldn't know what might be coming next or where you might go or anything. I've been extraordinarily lucky where I've never actually gone to look for a job once I got started. So something always seemed to turn up right around the time I needed it. So I don't have that experience really of, you know, trying to gauge and judge how to juggle things, or, you know, which offer am I going to take, kind of thing. But I was also in a situation where I was not there. So I didn't have any physical pressure either. You know, I didn't have to debate on what the working environment might be physically. It was always the same for me. This room, in fact. So, yeah, it was different. I do remember the hectic times of when they would, towards the end of the season, they would really want to get everything done so they could get started on whatever else was coming, or start pitching what they hoped would be the next show. And that could get hectic. But, you know. So.
Yeah, I was in the same boat as Brett in the fact that we both worked for Warner, and we were both on staff, but we were both long distance. So, and I had really considered there probably around 97, 98 of seriously moving to LA. I was pricing properties, but then I decided in the end that what they would pay me to work in-house, which would sort of handcuff me, would not be worth. I don't like to fly my flag under any one flag. It's just sort of my personality. I always sort of feel like the wolf is at the door. And right away, actually working on Superman, I had the experience that the show had just started airing. We had just started getting ratings back, and the rumors started going that they might cancel the show because the ratings weren't equal to what Batman's ratings were. And it really struck me that like there's all these things going on in the business that affect you that you have no control over, because somebody in some building somewhere looks at a sheet of paper and goes, shit, you know, and, you know, or some new executive comes in and eats the lions, cubs of the old executive. There's a lot of those things that have nothing to do with how good you draw or how nice a person you are. You know, I worked at MTV for a while where I commute back and forth. But I've never worked in the studio. I'm not saying that I wouldn't, but at that point I sort of felt like I was getting the best of both worlds, and that I could still work on those shows. But if I wanted to do a freelance gig, you know, and I had to not to have that much time, as you know, working on storyboards is like a sponge. It will just suck every atom of time every second of time that you have. But I also think that things have changed now. So if I had an opportunity that I felt was worth it, no matter, because I pitched a show with Bill Ray, and we had a development deal with Nickelodeon, which was off and on there for a couple of years. Like, well, if it went and it went to pilot, then I would be moving to LA. So it's like, if you're already in LA, it's not as much of a problem as if you're, you know, in Philadelphia, or, you know, you've got to go through the whole thing of moving, which was quite expensive. It would have been just easier to just like light a match and buy everything new in LA than actually try to move it across the country. But again, you know,
having just moved, I can relate to that.
Yeah. So it's a different, and again, I talked to a lot of, I've been teaching a long time, and I talked to a lot of young people on the cusp or in the cusp of doing this. And I think it really comes down to your personality. Your personality is sort of like the carburetor that sort of determines this. If you're young, it's always easier to take the risk because you don't have a lot of debt. Or some people do if they went to art school, like they went to Art Center and spent $80,000 a year. You have quite a bit of debt coming out, so you want to get a job right away because you want to start earning, right? But I don't know. It's the business is changing. The business is changing faster right now, I think, than it changed the previous 10 years. And it's changing in ways that I don't think anybody can really predict, because if the pandemic, let's say, lasted another 2 years before people could go back and work in the studio, those studios are not going to keep paying the air conditioning and the lighting in buildings that they don't have people in.
Yeah. Yeah, I know a couple of studios that have just closed the studio down because, you know, they were leasing the building. They're like, why are we paying for this? So if we do work for those studios again, post-pandemic, and we're going in, it'll be a different building. And I 100% agree with Mike that there are changes going on that we were not even aware of, and the people that have to make those decisions aren't aware of, because everybody's still kind of waiting to see what's going to happen.
Right.
Yeah. Like they just announced today, I don't know if you guys saw, so they finally announced that like Wonder Woman is going to stream on HBO and be in the theaters. There's no theaters around here to see it, but that's going to fund, if we go to all streaming, and people are going to be able to make $1 billion streaming instead of $1 billion in a theater.
That's going to change everything.
That's going to change the landscape in the ways that we cannot predict. So
Shannon, I promised you I would check in on you. How you feeling, bro?
I'm doing good. I'm enjoying chatting with you guys.
All right, cool. All right.
The daughter forgot that I'm live, but
no, we need a little howling at the moon once in a while. All right, so I want to get to this question. JRD asks, Shannon, you do everything that goes into book production, from writing to drawing to editing. Which part of the process do you enjoy most, and which part do you find is the most robotic for you?
Well, I mean, I think when you've got the beginning of the idea and you're putting everything together, that's the most exciting part, because there's so much, you know, you're still locking down whether you're going to do this or going to do that. So that's where all the, you know, the explosive energy is. And then I think when the part that's the most robotic to me, you know, is the post editing. You know, when you've got everything together, but now you're running everything through, you know, it's going to the printer, it's coming back. You're just making sure all these boxes are checked, you know, and that the paper is the paper you selected and paid for. You know, that part of it at the end, I think, is where it gets a little bit more like, all right, I need to, you know, even though I've got years of experience, I've got enough years of experience to know I'm going to miss something. So I've got a list, and then I've got friends that double check things with me. If you're at a company that's, you know, providing you proofreaders and all this other stuff, well, that's great, because those are the like fail safes in case you do miss something.
Yeah.
But not every studio's got that, and especially not when it's your own work and you're trying to catch everything. So I think, you know, the network execs and the higher ups at the studios probably wouldn't want to hear this, but for the creative people, most of us have circles of friends that we creatively will run stuff past. You know, like, hey, is this good? Do you like this? What do you think?
Yeah.
Your friends aren't going to get you fired. It's not going to end up on the internet if you've got good friends. And you know, we're looking out for each other, and ultimately we're looking out for the product. There's enough, you know, before the, you know, looking at Avengers, before the live action movies come out, they've got that machine so good over there right now, you know, during the whole Disney Marvel days, that we're writing episodes that will dovetail. You know, the kid watching the cartoon, you know, will see something, and then the next week he gets to go see the, you know, the follow-up in the movies. So there's a lot of professionals that are aware of all the secrets before these things come out, and they're keeping them. And, you know, I think that once again, your circle of friends, if they're really, you know, they're trusted advisors / peers, that's where the excitement is, when you can share all that with everybody. Yeah. The actual getting it out to the world part is probably the part that's, you know, the most robotic out of that. You know, and then there's the joy of like walking in the comic shop though, and then seeing it, and then having people come up to you know.
All right, I want to go through some more slides if you're still down with that.
Sure. I think.
All right, cool. No, this is great, and this is a sparking conversation with the room too.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about Ben 10.
Oh, Ben 10. Now this is a fun one, just because I think, you know, it's a super successful franchise by a bunch of comic book guys. So this to me is probably the closest culmination of like what we all do, which is, you know, Jamar, you're doing stuff with Scholastic now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so, you know, and we got TV and comics, and, you know, all this to me is like that perfect storm of like a plan coming together where, you know, they developed this, got it on the air. If I remember right, they weren't sure how successful it was just off the ratings, but then the toy people came to them. I was at Cartoon Network on a different show at the time, and they're like, this is a huge hit, because the toys were doing gangbusters. And so that just sort of allowed that whole collective, you know, probably sigh of relief from everybody that was working on this to go, all right, let's keep making them. Let's keep moving forward on it. And so, you know, it's my oldest, who is now old enough to be in the Marines. It was his favorite thing when we were young. And when the show first came out, we couldn't find it. There wasn't merchandising. So for like his original birthday party, my wife had to make like everything Ben 10 cups. I mean, she was like killing printers left and right to, you know, decorate for this party. And so for us, it was one of those really personal things, because I just, despite, it was one of those things where it just never lined up for me to actually get to work on the show. And so I finally got to write for it a few years ago. And that was one of those where, like, you know, there's certain projects you want to just check off a list. And, you know, that one was really special, because there's nothing better than your kid thinking you're cool. You know? And so for me, that one was, that's part of why this is in here, and will always be kind of special. So
question from the room.
Really fun character. It's a lot of fun, that show.
It really is. Yeah.
So Michael Cooper, who's covering up your face, Shannon, says any shows / projects that you really felt were something special, but for whatever reason got canceled?
Yeah, I mean, there's always ones like that. A lot of times the something special, going back to what we talked about, is the cruise, but just from an actual show, like the Silver Surfer series that we were working on, which I think is like a slide or two later there. So we we did that starting off in the Jack, the whole idea was to do it in the Jack Kirby style. That was something that we were all pushing for. It's slowly kind of morphed a little bit more to get the executives' approval into more of like a John Buscema with a Jack Kirby line over the top of it, I think is what it ended up to start getting stuff approved. Because, even though Jack's stuff, what we had done worked really well for animation, it was a little too stylized at the time for some of the execs. Mm-hmm. And, we had Thanos destroy the universe at the end of season 1. And, we were already like 4 episodes into the next season when the whole Marvel bankruptcy happened. And so that there's a whole generation of kids that just Thanos snapped his fingers and that was it. There was not a second movie. He just annihilated everybody. We died. And I felt a little guilty about that for a long time. But, our writers were a lot of the original Star Trek writers, DC Fontana, Harlan Ellison.
Wow.
All of those people were writing on the show. And those are people that I didn't know at the time were kind of teaching me how to be a writer, because I was asking them questions and talking to them about craft. And so just a few years later, when I got myself into I've taken away all of my art tools that I've, surrounded myself with, and I have to rely on my script ability. It was all about instruction that they had given me. And I was, to be honest, I was just a fan.
Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember, talking to Harlan. I mean,
do you remember something?
I think the main thing that I got from Harlan, DC was just so nice. I mean, so, I think a lot of it too was just that here are these people that I thought, oh my gosh, they worked on Star Trek. They must, they must walk down Hollywood Boulevard and everybody bows at their feet. And you realize like, that's not how Hollywood works. So it made me realize that there's a part of, and talking to them about this, that the part you can control is being good at your craft. And Bernie Wrightson and I hung out 4 nights a week, usually during the 90s when he moved to LA, and I was every now, there'd be like once a week where I would wig out and be like, I can't believe I'm at dinner with Bernie Wrightson. The rest of the time we talked about beer and whatever else was going on. But it made me realize, Bernie had this good advice that you can control whether you're good at your craft. You can't control whether you're popular. That's just something that kind of happens at the right time where you're good at your craft at the right moment on the right project. And what'll happen is that popularity will go, he was at a point where he felt like, the popularity maybe had lapsed, but he's like, you still got to be a good person and be nice to the people around you and everything, and so he was a great mentor for me. And I think a lot of those Star Trek writers were the same thing, where we probably have them all up on a pedestal, but they're still trying to get their next gig. They have to be good at their craft. You can enjoy the success you had in your past, but unless it's that level of success where you never have to work again, you have to work again. And so you have to be continually good at your craft. You have to be kind and generous to the people around you, whether they're a dumb kid who just broke into animation that, doesn't really know what he's doing at this point. So it made me realize like, oh, we always talk about like our art heroes, in terms of like the skill set that they have, but there are also people who manage to pay a mortgage, being married to the same person for as long as they want to be married to each other because they're good, kind people, all that stuff is also part of this job. And that part gets left out so much. And so I think that having just luckily being these role models were right there at my fingertips. I lucked out in a way that a lot of people don't, because I got to see the other part of the job, which is living a life and not just the stuff you do at work. So that's the stuff I've tried to take with me throughout my career.
Because Hollywood is full of the other people that have the other part, and they're just miserable bastards.
Absolutely.
They end up like never having a good relationship with anybody and strung out on drugs, and then at the end, it's the Hollywood story,
Yeah. And I got to say that I've been super fortunate that I'd say that 90 to 95% of mine has been the other, like getting to meet Harlan Ellison and have him tell you hilarious, cranky stories about him chewing somebody out. You're like, oh, I'd love to be able to do that. It's just and also, I got chewed out with a couple of buddies. We went up to go bug Alex Toth. A friend's like, come along, we're gonna go bug Alex. And so we went up and we got critiqued, and he tore us apart. But the thing I took away from that was, here's this art legend that we were all in awe of, you know, from animation and comics. He was like, there was very few of those back then. So, you know, Doug Wildey, you know, Alex, you know, the guys who in the, you know, 60s, Johnny Quest rolling into, you know, the end of their careers when I was starting. What I took away from it wasn't that he was, you know, cranky and an old guy and tearing us apart. It's that he spent hours with us doing that. And so I realized, like, oh, he gave his time. He actually, like looking back later, you know, it was funny. At the time we were like, we knew it going in that was going to happen. And it was so worth it. And it's something we still talk about, that group of friends that, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how bad he said you are. And you know, the takeaway wasn't the critique. It was that he was being generous, giving us the critique. And, you know, he may have gotten a little, you know, crusty around the edges as he aged. I don't know what he was like as a young guy, but you know, it was that generosity.
I want to here's a little spice. We always have a spicy question. So Mark said,
this top button here.
Yeah, that's all right. Mark says, were there shows or projects that weren't fun to work on for whatever reason? And you can tell or not tell, Shan. We're all pros.
Yeah, I absolutely. I don't remember any like specific one off the top of my head. I know that usually what it ends up coming down to is you'll have a great group of people and somebody brought in some super talent, and usually the super talent is not worth the, you know, I talked about this when I lectured at the universities, that there's so much more benefit to being a kind, decent human being who's good at your craft than there is to be an amazing artist who has no people skills.
Mm-hmm.
That person may work on that show that one season, but they're not getting brought back.
Yeah.
You know, they're not worth it. It's not worth it because
I'm sorry.
it brings everybody else's productivity down. I know better, Mike. You know, the joy that you get from that one person who comes in and brings donuts on Tuesdays and like, everybody, you know, I won the lotto last night. And you're like, oh my gosh, how much did you win? The amount for these donuts, you know, and then you're like, there is a joy that spreads throughout the group at that point. And all of a sudden you're, you know, whistling while you work and everybody around you is having a good time. So I would say it's usually been that more than I've ever been put on, because I've been on some really crappy shows that I won't say. It's a small industry, but they were crappy in that it was one of those network, everything gets thrown into the soup. Not that it started off as a bad idea from the creator, and you got to make the best of it. And those were some of the most fun, because you're like, I'm with all these talented people and we're trying to polish this thing that should not have gotten on the air. And, you know, it's fun too, because you know, I don't know about you guys, there's stuff that you worked on that's not as successful as others, but there'll still be fans for it that come up to you and thank you for, you know, and it's their favorite thing or got them to get into the industry. So I've got a different lens on it. I've got a different lens on it than I did when I was younger. But yeah.
When your work goes out into the world, you have no idea how it's going or any control how it affects people.
Absolutely.
And you know, the worst show is still somebody's favorite show.
That's a good point. Yeah.
The Jimmy Stewart Christmas movie, Shawshank Redemption, those were all flops when they came out, and here you know, they're classics. Not that any of the cartoons I worked on, I'm putting in that category, but you know, somebody somewhere appreciated it.
Shan, I want to try to blaze through some more of these slides. And we're having a great time. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah. Hopefully I'm not keeping up you guys too late on the East Coast.
No, this is what we do, bro.
Yeah, I went to bed at like 4 o'clock last night. So,
oh my God.
So
we're not going to be on that long, though.
This was the most terrifying conversation I've ever had with one of my best friends, was asking Bernie to do a cover for my book. So this was, you know, this is during my relationship with Bernie started. I was at Fox, and this is back when, you know, you had to, was it 411 that you would dial for information?
Yeah.
And a buddy heard that Wrightson had moved to LA, and he had just gotten there like that week. And I had nothing, I had nothing else to do. So I'm literally sitting there doing character designs on some Marvel show all day long, going 411 Studio City. Do you guys have a Bernie Wrightson? Nope. Okay. 411. Do you guys have? I mean, I was just going through every single city in Los Angeles, and I ended up getting Bernie on the phone. We talked for 4.5 hours, and finally he said, "Hey, kid, you want to go get a beer?" And then I went and got a beer with him, and then I went and got a beer with him 3 to 4 nights a week for years. And he became one of my closest friends. It was funny because Steve Niles and I were also friends, and Steve, I was trying to introduce to Bernie for years because I thought they would really hit it off. And so when we moved out of LA when we were having our second kid and moved to Arizona for a bit, Steve finally bumped into Bernie at Dark Delicacies, and then they were hanging out 3 to 4 nights a week. So it was this really nice transition. I think Steve and Bernie's relationship was probably more, brothers of the same age. And Bernie was like a big brother to me. He definitely mentored me in ways that, I'll take with me forever, that have less to do with drawing and more about like the craft of being a professional in an industry and being proud of your work, constantly trying to get better at your work, and not letting, anything negative that people say about anything, really get you too down, because it's way more important what your, wife and kids and your close friends think about you than Joe Blow who wrote something on the internet. So, that's the kind of advice that I cherish, and I wish, more people had got to meet their heroes and then got to be friends with their heroes, and then respect their heroes even more after actually getting to know them. Yeah. But yeah, going back to the, I'd been friends with Bernie for already about 4 years at this point, and I was like, "Will you do a cover for me?"
Like the Peter Brady voice. Oh.
Yes, yeah, it was about like that. So
that's great.
He did, and I still have this framed up. He gave it to me for my birthday, and it's my one of my cherished that. And I have a Mike Allred original where to also give a shout out that wasn't asked for to super kind people. At one of my very first cons, I'd spent all the money I had to get to Chicago. I had stood in so many hours. I was told I was horrible by so many people, and it's really debilitating when you're like, this is all the money I have, and now I got to go back and I got to work for 2 weeks before I get another paycheck, and I have no money to get. I don't know how this is going to work. And I had done a Madman pinup, and I was a huge Allred fan, and stood in the line. Showed Mike. Mike was super gracious, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, this is so! I can't believe you did spend time on my project." Once again, it was that generosity, and he said, "Oh, you know what? My inks are back at the. Do you mind if I ink this?" And I was like, "I love that." And he said, "Oh wait, my inks are back at the hotel. If you come back later, I'll go get my inks and I'll ink it up." And I thought that was the most polite brush off. Like, he handled it so well. I thought, and I did. I came back later. He had actually run to his hotel room and got his inks, and then pulls me out of the line. He's still signing stuff for people, and he just starts inking this Madman on this pinup I did. And that one also I have, to remind me, and I love Mike and the whole Allred family, that kindness goes a long way, and that generosity you share with somebody. And I've told him years later that the story, and he was saying that the Hernandez brothers had done something very similar to him, and he wasn't thinking about that when he did it to me. He was really happy to kind of repay the karma that had been extended to him. So I try and keep that in mind too, that there's,
Yeah, that's a great story. And like, just having such a very positive, energetic story to tell is even a better currency than saying, "Oh, I blew off these kids that were waiting at my table for 4 hours and we went and got tacos."
Yeah. That's not the energy you should be putting out to the universe.
Right.
And so both of those guys were very kind to me at a point where I really wasn't professional enough to be conversing with them, I thought, and so I say that because I think there's a lot of us that go out there being like, if you respect somebody's work, go up and tell them that. It could lead to something joyous.
Yeah.
I can add a little bit about Bernie. I first met him when I think I was 12, because he was working with that publisher in Dearborn, Michigan. I had relatives there, and we go back to those conventions and particular ones in Dearborn, where Bernie was there. What was that? Christopher Enterprises, I think, was the name of the publisher.
Yeah. Yep.
So I always showed him my stuff, and I saw him for about 4 or 5 years in a row. and he was as kind as he could be. I mean, I could barely talk. I was so nervous. You know?
Yeah.
And he gave me great advice, and it was very encouraging and always kind. And he didn't need to be, you know, but that was the kind of person he was.
Yeah.
That's great.
And it's funny, I worked at the printer that printed that book in Michigan. I worked there and Satin's Tears. They also printed Satin's Tears, the Alex Nino book.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Yeah. It was fun. So it's funny how the world connects in those ways.
Absolutely. That's another guy too that I don't have a personal story with Alex, but a lot of my mentor, the Filipino guys, do. Same kind of thing. Like they would talk about Alex the same way I revere Mike and Bernie. You know, it's a small planet, despite how big it is. And, you know, I always tell everybody Hollywood's the smallest town I've ever lived in.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, I'm throwing that out as the entertainment industry. It includes DC and New York when they were there, and Marvel and all that. It's all very interconnected. And it's a little harder to see when you're on the outside. But when you get inside, you're like, oh my gosh, these threads are just nonstop. All this stuff connects to each other.
All right, I'm gonna go to the next one.
All right.
No, this is great.
Yeah, that was done at the time of the Silver Surfer show. So that was you know, back when they would do magazines to promote things. I think this was the cover of Toon magazine at that.
Okay, yeah.
So I've done that, and then they were also at the end of I got to do a bunch of these Kirby-esque pieces that at the end of the show they would run, and then our names would go over the top of them. So you know,
oh, okay, cool.
They're barely visible. You know, if you watch, you know, I think it's on Disney Plus. All the illustrations that I did, but that was kind of fun. That was one of those, you know, where they're like, oh wait, you do comics, why don't you just, you know, get Stan to approve these and just, you know, do a bunch of them until Stan says to stop doing them, you know. So that was pretty nerve-wracking, but exciting. And then you know, I had the black and white pieces, and then a few years ago, you know, that's the joy of the internet, is a professional, you know, colorist buddy of mine, Milan, just sent me this. He's like, hey, I colored this up.
Oh, that's
on the internet. So
that's fantastic.
Going back to animation comics guys. So Keith Giffen and I wrote a bunch of stuff together, like all through the 2000s. And Keith and I knew each other from storyboards. You know, he was doing boards at Warner Brothers. You know, as a comic book guy, I was, you know, you guys, since you didn't work in the office, you don't know this, but when your stuff would come in, we would run over and everybody would like Xerox off the sweet pages. You know, so there's binders somewhere that I've moved cross country a couple of times with Xeroxes of all of your stuff.
That's great.
That would come in, and you know, we always loved when the comic guys would do boards too, because we knew who you were. So it was, you know, it was kind of like getting to see like an inside baseball kind of thing, like, oh, this is how they approach boards versus how they approach a comic panel. And since we like doing both, it was, you know, it was a great learning experience. So you'd have like all these ex-comic guys turned board artists in the studio, you know, taking turns at the copier, and one person was usually look out for whatever production manager would tell us to cut it out, that we were wasting $2,000 worth of Warner Brothers paper.
That's awesome.
We were the same way, because for us, seeing, especially like on Bruce's crew, I mean, they had that comic book sensibility, and they wanted to, you know, their boards were beautiful. I remember seeing some Ronnie Del Carmen boards, and everybody was doing great stuff. And so that was
Darwin. Don't forget Darwin.
Darwin,
yeah.
Darwin, still in my mind, like, he's always going to be my animation buddy. Like, I know he has this legendary comics career, but to me, that was something he left to go do. Like, I remember like Burbank Warner Brothers parties, and it was like, I'm going to get into a belly flop contest with Darwin, like that. Like, so I think that I love that guy, and haven't, you know, it's I miss him. So I'm glad you brought him up.
So tell us about this one.
So this was something Keith and I just did up as a comic, and got in Entertainment Weekly, which was really cool. And Desperado was the publisher at the time. It was Joe Pruitt doing his thing, teaming up with Image. So yeah, it's a World War II story. It's survive the night. Some Germans and some Americans are trying to kill each other all night, and then a bazooka shell goes off in the wrong crypt, and stuff pours out, and suddenly it's a survive the night story.
Those are my favorites. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to do, and we got some good quotes on the back from Ed Brubaker, and Dwayne McDuffie used to have the office next to mine. I think we both pissed off somebody because they stuck us in a hallway with attorneys. Actually, shout out to Warner Brothers attorneys. Turned out to be a whole lot of fun. Like, we went into it with a bad attitude, and we ended up coming out of there like, hey, these guys are way more fun than we thought they were going to be. Well, because they made insane amounts of money and worked 4 hours a day. But yeah, so the going back to the whole studio thing. It's always those like surprising, encounters that you get out of it that, I knew who Dwayne was, and Dennis was on another floor, and I got to befriend him during that production. They were upstairs doing Static Shock, and I was working on Osmosis Jones, and then freelancing on, DC stuff when I could, because I loved it. So, there was so much interaction between comic and animation at that period. So
I did a lot of boards on Static because I was still on staff then.
Yeah, they had that was a great show. There was so many good people on that show. Yeah,
That's awesome.
I mean, I'm hoping that, I think that's on HBO Max now, isn't it? Isn't that one of the ones they added to the?
I think so.
Yeah.
And there's talks of like a new series or something. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah.
That's great. All right, we'll kick through a couple more. And then we're going to start wrapping up, Shannon. Where'd the 2 hours go? Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it went quick. So yeah, you can just bang through it. I mean, I just threw out some stuff. So if anybody wanted to see what I've done, but I don't have an agenda here. Deadpool, that was a fun one, just because like I said, I was coming home from working on the X-Men cartoon and then getting to draw Deadpool at night, and it's that character, man. It's sure come around. I remember I started off working for Rob. Rob generously gave me my first paid gig, and outside of like fast food restaurants, those
Right.
generous also with their dollars. But this is my first career job, and so it was really sort of a sweet, karma thing to be able to tell Rob, like, hey, I'm getting to draw your character, after I had left, working for Rob to go work at Fox Kids, and then this is the book I get on. I'd love to say that the once again, this is nothing with the people. It was the schedule on this was nuts, because I was coming home after boarding and character designing all day. Brent knows my wife Kristen, so I was still in the wooing stage, and so I was like, well, I still got to make some time for some wooing. But drawing a whole comic page at night was tough, and at the time, the book was behind. So when they asked me if I wanted to do it, I was going to be drawing the back half of the issues. But I had half the amount of time that you normally had. But now I'm adding that on top of a day job, which is drawing Marvel stuff all day, to come home and draw Marvel stuff all day. And I think it was like shortly after about, a 5-issue run on this. If I'd known how popular this character was going to be, I might have stayed on for like a couple more trade paperbacks worth of material. But that was when I was like, all right, I need to be a little bit more precious with the later hours. It had nothing to do with drawing Deadpool or the experience. It was just like, there's only so much time in the day. And so they're going, all right, well, what's Shannon Denton want to do? What am I going to be known for? And I was already getting to work on all this Marvel stuff. So anyway, this sort of was like the catalyst that led me to doing my own thing.
I love it. That's great. I think that there's a couple more.
That's just a collected thing for the Deadpool trade, and then so there's some great people. Pete Woods was who I recommended take over for me, and it all worked out. Pete and I've been buddies forever, and he's an amazing comic book artist. So that was a really good decision on mine. And Pete, you probably owe me a beer, so I'm just going to put it out here on this thing. Because I love Pete is still looking like it's really hard to do, to be 15-20 years into your career and then like reinvent yourself so that you look different, but still you. And I feel like
his
exploration of color in the last couple of years has really sort of opened up what he's been doing. You know, It's always been good. And now it's like, oh, now he's good, but he feels new again, which is hard for a friend that you've been an admirer of their work for so long.
Right. Yeah. Just the level up, as you may call it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's cool. It's nice. And it's refreshing for those of us that are not our first week into our career, that you can still do that. You know, it's good. Like, all right. I still got tricks. I got to figure out what they are, but I still got tricks.
Well, and just, sometimes that comes from just finding a project that really kind of like, I don't know, electrifies you in a way.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
That's really cool.
So there's Deadpool. What else we got? We got oh, this was fun. This one also kind of goes into the sweet spot with like kids. So my buddy Michael Chang, that I started at Extreme Studios with, love you, Mike, love all the Extreme guys, was directing on this show. My boys love this show. They would ask me constantly, why don't you work on this show, Dad? And I'd be like, hey, dudes, why don't I work on? But as you guys know, sometimes it's not that they can't. The only way they can make room for you on a project is they have to fire one of your other friends, which you don't really want. I want to work on the thing, but I don't want you to fire one of my buddies.
Right. Somebody else is getting the box.
Yeah, you don't want anybody in the box. So I wasn't able to work on this when it ran originally. You know, I was just a fan watching with my sons. But when they came around and did the Scooby-Doo Batman movie with, you know, a lot of the same, I got to work on that. So then it was like, all right, I get to check this version of Batman off the list that my sons and I adored. And also, too, it was the first time I got to work on Scooby-Doo. So, you know, it was fun 20-something years into a career to go. One of the things that just blew my mind as a child that made me really love animation, I'm now getting, because I worked with all the Scooby creators and all those guys, but I never got to work on Scooby. So this was a nice way to get to check that off a box.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, our buddy Chris Bailey was on not too long ago talking about Scooby.
Yeah, he's on the new one with the team ups. It's great stuff. Yeah, I don't know if there's a lot of guys like Frank Parr, Gary Hart. There's all these guys I know that are comic book / animation. And that was, I think, a lot more common. I don't run into it as much with people getting into animation now. Going back to what we talked about at the beginning of the show, which is that whole laser focus that a lot of people have in their training. Like people now, they want to go into animation. They're studying animation and animators.
Right.
I think that when you watch any kind of entertainment now and you see the 500 names at the end, those are all laser focused, super awesome skill set. When I got in, it was much more like, are you sure you want to do this, kid? You could go down the hall and, you know, do something else. And, you know, you see like 10 to 15 names at the end of the show.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. All right.
That was a really fun version of Batman, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you work on that one?
Yeah. So
thank you. I worked as a character designer.
That's right. Yeah. I think everybody I know that I'm friends with worked on that but me. So but you guys did an amazing job.
That was the show. So much fun. That was the show where I transitioned from paper to working digital in Storyboard Pro.
Yeah. That was crazy too. And then at the premiere of that, Diedrich, who did the voice for Batman, was so kind to my sons who were at the premiere in LA with me. So, you know, it was definitely, you know, sometimes you get lucky like that, and the things you work on kind of, like you said, reinvigorate you to, you know, to love what you do again. Not that you ever did, but it is a grind sometimes. So a lot of this is just stuff we did. Comic Works is like I said, the publishing company that does My Way books that we did. You know, Spider-Man was writing on that. Justice League Action was writing on that one. You know, it was fun. There was a period there a couple of years ago before I went to go work at a video game company where I was writing on 7 different shows at the, you know, I stayed at the same time. It was over the course of a year. You know, animation doesn't have a writer's room the way, you know, I think some people are starting to do that, but it's not a writer's room where you go in the way you do with a live action show. You know, it's a little bit more like comics where you get in and you meet with the studio, and some studios are like, hey, pitch us your ideas. And then they pick the one they like and you go write it. And others are like, here's the ideas you've been assigned because they have to tie into the Captain Marvel movie coming up down the line. And you write that episode based on the outline they give you.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. Just kind of going through all these, and it's kind of like a cornucopia of like top tier projects, you know. And I think what's always funny is when we have people watching and they ask questions, or you know, there's a lot of comments in the chat like, "Oh, I grew up with this," or "That was my favorite thing." And I always wonder about just kind of like there's a little bit of disconnect. I think the creatives have to put between themselves and the fandom.
Yeah.
Right. So I wonder. I have a question about just, you know, you go to enough cons, and I'm sure you've been on enough panels where somebody says, "Hey, Shan, come sit on this thing with us. We're going to talk about whatever." How do you find the fun to talk about projects with fans? Because you almost, I'm assuming you have to kind of turn your dial up a little bit to kind of match their.
You do, and
right?
I'm pretty honest with them that they know the material way better than I ever am going to, because they sat down and consumed it as a fan. You know, on shows like Brave and the Bold, I can talk about that more knowledgeably, having watched it with my sons as a fan, than Teen Titans and some of the other shows that I worked on, because I was so focused on the component that I was assigned. Yeah. And didn't have time to go see what Mike Chang or Alex Soto were directing over here, and you know what the guys that I was working with were doing in their individual episodes. You know, Teen Titans, when we worked on it, you know, at the time I remember being like, "That's the cartoony crap." You know, there was so the fandom changed enough, and in a good way. I think the industry was, you know, for the longest time, a lot of us as creators, you know, we wanted more women in the industry. And we worked with, I mean, my wife at work. By the way, there's an HR video where you're not supposed to do that. And I asked her out about 20 minutes after watching the video. It all worked out 20 years later, but just FYI. Yeah. The cartoon that I worked on, you know, they were like, "Oh, that's the cartoony one." And we got a lot of like derision from it at the time. And me as a fan, Marv Wolfman wrote the very first comic book script I ever got paid to draw. You know, as a backup in one of the Extreme books. And then he wrote the very first episode of animation that I ever got to storyboard. Wow. Which was an X-Men thing. And then you know, and so then he wrote the episodes of Teen Titans that I worked on. And so, you know, I love Marv. But my point being more that at the time we were having fun with it, and we were making a show that we liked. Yeah. And some of the fans liked it, some of the fans didn't. We were unfortunately just getting access to the ones telling us they didn't like it, not realizing there was this whole generation of young girls that were watching this Teen Titans cartoon, who then cut 2 years later, I am now working with as fellow professionals, fellow directors. They've gone into the industry, and this had a huge impact on them. Yeah. And, you know, so I'm incredibly proud of that. And it's funny too, because now Teen Titans Go is even more successful than this one was. And so when fans find out I worked on Teen Titans, they're like, "Did you work on the serious one?" And it's the, you know, give it 10 years lens of time. And suddenly the cartoony crap that I worked on is now the serious version. And, you know, I think it's because it was genuine. Like, we were making something that we liked, and we were, you know, referencing anime and different things that we liked, that we were pulling in. Murakami and those guys knew what they were doing. You know, so, you know, sometimes your audience is there. They don't have the ability to let you know. Yeah. Yeah. You know, and ultimately, you know, it all works out. So I always find that there has to be a little bit of a bridge between the creative and the fan, right? Yeah. Because, you know, that's another place where you could lose people, because, you know, you don't remember what happened in episode 400A. You know what I mean? Like, I guess you enjoyed it. That's great. But being able to kind of match them and meet them in the middle, it's like, well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And, you know, we got a lot from it. Yeah. But and I'm aware some fandom has, you know, gotten toxic over the last couple of years on the internet and everything. Luckily, you know, my experience is usually, you know, it's people coming up to me at a convention that I realize would stab me in the eye to have my job, you know, and as terrifying as it is, it's also kind of like reaffirming that, like, I'm very lucky and very fortunate. You know, I work hard and I put myself in this position, but I'm also fortunate that it worked out and that it's continuing to work out. And I think that about my friends who are working. And so that energy I love, you know. Yeah. the internet's a weird place where it's anonymous sometimes. I don't know that it's as real, even if it's loud.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my experience when I'm actually at the conventions, people will tell you like, oh, I didn't necessarily like that cape in Spider-Man Unlimited, and then you can go, here's a story about the cape, and then suddenly they're on board. I've never experienced the vitriol I think in person generally people are much kinder, and there's so that's something for the younger people to know out there, that you may be reading a lot of stuff and it seems like the whole world's shouting.
Yeah.
But I found the world's a much kinder place when you're actually out
in person. Yeah, I think in person, nobody's going to come and egg your table at a convention, right? They'll egg your table online because it's also part of the culture, and those type of voices, which have always existed.
Yeah.
But now they have that so easy platform just to go, and then they get together with their other hate buddies, and they all try to, because I deal with that with the message boards for the strips, and that's their whole thing, is just like going to every strip and like pissing on that strip. That's their whole thing.
Yeah.
And
if that's all you're accessing, it seems like, well, there's all these people, when the reality is they're not. It's not all the people. The people that were telling me that the Teen Titans show was too cartoony back then were not all the people. It was just the ones that I was hearing from in that moment. Over the course of my career, I realized it was a much bigger audience that was actually liking it, and have come up and told me so. So,
and most people don't write. Most people who like something just enjoy it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Most people that like a TV show, just whatever, they just enjoy it. And
I think all of us as pros, we're fine with critiques. So I'm not trying to say you shouldn't critique things or have opinions. We all have opinions and like things, but as a creator, don't ever let the noise get in the way of the passion.
Oh, I like that. We have time for the last question. I know everybody's very sad.
Thanks again for having me on. This has been great.
No, this is great. As a kid say, we just chop it up for hours.
See you guys in person when all this funness is.
Yeah.
Our good buddy Suzanne Waringo from the Mighty Waringo family asks, Shannon, is there a dream project still out there that you would love to do if you didn't have to worry about time or money?
As a fan, I can say that it's always sweeter when you're working on your own thing. So I have projects of mine that I've set up around town that I hope move to that next stage. We had a show on the air for a couple of years. That was a blast, getting paid to work on your own thing. That was on the CW cartoon. So yes, I have those. But then just as a fan, I've been very lucky that I've gotten to work on, because I chase on the things that I love. Star Trek's still on the list. I got to cross that off. Big Star Trek fan, have not gotten to work on that yet. And then a bunch of them, but I still would like the Shadow and the Phantom for me to cross off. And then the whatever my daughter, she's still young enough that she's going to discover something and be like, Dad, why don't you work on that show like I did with her brothers? That will inspire me to want to work on that thing, and I'll be a big fan of it because I'll be, feeding off of her enthusiasm for it. So, it's really kind of fun having, your kids go, hey, I just watched this thing, I went in my room and, on my phone, watched this whole season of Netflix show, and it's amazing, and you should check it out. And then suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, well, there's something I should check out. I've got I got a reason to be invested in this. So that I think, is a ton of fun too, when you can have somebody bring you something and their enthusiasm makes you want to be on board with it.
Yeah.
That's pretty infectious. That's why I think that what we've kind of talked about throughout the course of tonight is, what you bring outside of your craft, like what you bring of you, is equally important, because that infectious enthusiasm goes a long way.
I love it.
Definitely.
Mike and Brett, do you have any last questions for Shannon before we wrap them?
Not questions, just happy to see him.
Yeah, and congratulations. I haven't got to say that yet because we've been chatting about work stuff, but Brett, congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. And Beth wanted me to say hello. You probably remember, I think we met in Phoenix.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, when the woo,
Look at that. Shining. So Shannon, thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. I think all of our fans watching tonight and who'll listen later got a lot out of this. I love when we can just really talk a lot of clean shop, and there's a lot of things I learned tonight just about the studio system, and these things are invaluable to me and to, I think, the people who check in every week to hang out with us. Shannon, before you go, where can people find you or follow you on socials?
I'm pretty easy to find. ShannonDenton.com. Any of the Twitters and Instagrams and stuff are my name. I'm the dude, Shannon Denton. That's usually easier.
The dude abides.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Well, Shannon, if you don't mind, you want to hang out with us as we close the show?
Absolutely.
All right. Cool. I'm gonna wrap us up on our 2-hour mark. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to see Brett with us. Thanks, Brett, for coming in. Mike, it's always a pleasure. So some housekeeping for everybody who's watching. If this is your first time watching us on YouTube, hello. Why don't you subscribe and smash that bell so you can get updates on our next episode. Facebook on our Pencil to Pencil page, like and follow us. And just to let you know, we're taking next Wednesday off for Thanksgiving or whatever. What do we call it? What do we call it?
Thanks, COVID giving.
Thanks, COVID. For COVID giving. But we're going to be back on, the year's almost over, you guys. We're going to be back on.
Thank God.
On December 2nd with our guest, Katie Cook. Katie Cook is a fantastic cartoonist, and she's like demolishing webtoons. Everybody knows who Katie is, and she's amazing. I can't wait to have her on the show so we can talk shop with her. So if you need something to do on the 2nd of December, you know where to go. Thank you so much. All right, guys, we're going to wrap it up and say goodnight. There's a really nice thing. Michael Cooper says, another fantastic interview and conversation, guys. I really appreciated Shannon's insight into the business and the wonderful anecdotes. Such a positive, inspiring gentleman. Good job. And Katie Cook. Thanks. All right, you guys, this has been Pencil to Pencil. Thank you guys so much for your eyeballs and your ear lobes. We'll be back on the 2nd of December with another episode. But until then, you know what to do. Just follow along, Shannon. We'll see you next time. Don't forget to wash those Kirby hands.
Woo!
You got to get Kirby. There you go. That's a nice one right there.
Yeah. We're scanning our fingerprints right now and putting them in a database.
I love it. All right, take care.